Hi everybody, my name is David and this is All Things Sacred. So I'm going to try to finish my notes today. I said that last time, but I had a little bit more to say than I thought that I did about the notes. And that may end up to be the case here. I don't know, let's find out. So I talked about how the goddess manifests as Tamas, Rajas, and Sattvas, the three gunas, and how she manifests in the first Charita as Mahakali, manifests as Yoganidra, the sleep of Vishnu, or Mahamaya, the great delusion that causes this whole nature that we're entrapped in, that we're encapsulated in, that limits us from seeing our true essential soul nature, and how she also, if propitiated, can be awakened to allow us to gain liberation and moksha and become unattached from the delusions of this world that keep us in suffering and limitation. And then how she can manifest, or how she does manifest, as the goddess Mahalakshmi in the form of Ambika, in the form of the goddess as the one who has an embodied form in the second Charita, Mahashashura Mardini, the slayer of Mahashashura, is essentially who she is. And in this sense, she's a manifestation of Rajas. And what she has to say for us practically is that in her defeat of Mahashashura, she pinpoints him just like we have to pinpoint the root cause of our passions to destroy their negative effects on our life rather than dealing with each individual passion. Because if we deal with each individual passion, it will just transform itself into another passion that will still cause us stress and anxiety and eventually even probably bring us back to a Tamasian state possibly, or just fighting anger and violence will rise and will be will have negative effect upon our life. And so we have to learn to find the root cause of that, and she manifests as Rajas and is able to pinpoint that. And I liken that to that Rajasic energy turning inward on itself, because the only way to really pinpoint that and find that root cause of our passions that drive us to insanity, essentially, eventually, is through meditation. That's really what I meant when I said turn that Rajas energy inward, become passionate, even if, we're trying to free ourselves from the passion. If we're in that state of passion, try to use that passion for something that will free us from all this negativity. And that is only by turning inward and finding that we have become too attached to the results of everything that's going on. Eventually we'll have to let go of that. But since we are attached to the results, then the result of finding a piece of, at least some peace of mind, can become something that we can work towards, and we'll watch as even the attachment to that diminishes, hopefully, as we enter a sattvic state. So sattva is the third guna, and this would then be likened to the state of goodness. This is someone who has a balanced character, who is charitable, who is kind and compassionate, who is able to think of others and is regulated and well balanced and happy. This is the state that we should strive for while we're still, within the realm of the three gunas. Before we transcend, we should always aim towards that sattvic state, because it brings betterment for ourselves and others. It's like our dharma to fulfill this, to become sattvic and help others to break out of their tamasic or rajasic states, or to help grow and evolve, because even tamas and rajas, have a place in the universe, obviously, and the goddess shows that by manifesting in these different forms throughout the tale of the Devi Mahatmyam. And so I'll get back to the notes here to talk a little bit about how she manifests in her sattvic form from Mahasaraswati, and how the Asuras, Shumba and Nishumba, are a representation of even of a perverted sattva. Because, it's easy to understand how the demons would represent a perversion of tamas, and it was more difficult to understand how the goddess would represent a purified Yeah, tamas. And and there's a mix there, of course, in the rajas. We could see that the Devi would manifest as a purified Rajas in good action, taking this energy and turning it towards good and progressive means, making progress in our lives and breaking through barriers as well, and overcoming obstacles is another great use of that Rajas energy. And how the Rajas energy as represented by the Ashuras was perverted, and we could easily understand how that could happen because Rajas is often associated with stress and anxiety and negativity. So even when we're driven to do a lot of great advancements, when we're very driven to work and get a lot accomplished, by becoming so attached to the end results of our actions, we end up harming ourselves and bringing with it all that stress and negativity. And so it's easy to understand how the Devi and the Asuras would be representative of Rajas. But to think that there's a perverted form of Sattva, which we understand the Devi, of course, she's going to come and she's going to represent this balance and compassionate energy, as she has throughout the whole thing, throughout all the Charitas. But we have to wonder, going into this, how are the Asuras going to be representative of a negative, of something negative about Sattva? What is there negative to say about, this state of being, which is often likened to the state of goodness? So the note says, in the final story, Mahasarasvati takes the form of the Devi in multiple ways, revealing her all-pervading nature. In this story, we have the Devi, the band of mothers, Kali, and Shivaduti. There is the very Rajasic sequence of the slaying of Raktabij, but the main focus is the Sattvic slaying of Shumba and Nishumba. Raktabij is able to create replications of himself, and the battle requires Kali to defeat him. He symbolizes pervasive or negative thinking, and can only be overcome by stopping identification with the thoughts both good and bad. This is the role of Chamunda Kali Sadhana. So I'll tackle this note in all its pieces. So it says, in the final story, Mahasarasvati, so she is the presiding energy, the presiding deity, the presiding Shakti over the third Charita, and she takes the form in multiple ways, as I list here. Then we have the Devi, of course, herself, as represented in the last story, and then the band of mothers, which is all the Shaktis, all the powers of all the various gods as are manifested as consorts. And even though they manifest from the gods, the male deities, we see at a later point in the story that I'll mention here in the note too, they all return into the Devi. So all these Shaktis, all these energies, all these powers came from the Devi. And then we also have Kali and Shivaduti as well. And I believe Shivaduti is actually considered part of the band of the Devi overall. So that makes her like the most, she's like the Shakti, the power of power, She's what gives power its potency. And, we see that by her, ordering Shiva around, hence the name Shivaduti. And of course Kali, which is like another aspect of the goddess. We see that she's born directly from the goddess, almost like the shadow of the goddess, that very, very much so. And I say there that it reveals her all-pervading nature, because she is able to take the form of so many different beings at one place, at one time, and born from the very essences of the different devas, of the different gods. It shows that she exists throughout all things, that in her sattvic form, in her balanced and good form, she is throughout all creation and helps sustain it. She holds it all together, hidden within all things. Then the next part of the note says that there's the very Rajasic sequence of the slaying of Raktabij, and this is true, everything is so bloody. And, Rajas is often associated with the color red and fiery, active energy. Raktabij is a very powerful, frightening Ashura whose every drop of blood spawns more and more of him. This is a very Rajasic sequence. And I say further down in the notes that he symbolizes pervasive negative thinking, especially how when we kill off one negative thought, it's replaced with another and another. And this is even more so not just the thoughts, but like this attachment to our sense of being the thought train. You know, we often have this identification with being this voice in our head. We'll sit there by ourselves. You know, a lot of us, we have an attachment to our body. You know, our sense of self comes from what we see in the mirror. But a lot of times, you know, when we're not sitting in front of the mirror and we're just there thinking to ourselves, our sense of self really comes from either the picture show that is playing in our head or the stream of words that is going through our mind. We see that to be ourselves. And the problem is that this traps us, that we become imprisoned within this cage of the mind, and we can't see outside of it into the real world around us. This is, you know, where a lot of our delusions come from, is the identification with this part of ourself. And this, when we become trapped, you know, eventually the mind becomes kind of mad with its own power. It's a very tricky thing. It's never really satisfied, especially when it's given all the power in the world. The mind is never satisfied with that, and it will play tricks on the person who becomes imprisoned. It almost becomes a torturer as well as someone who is there. You know, it's both the cage, and it feels as though it's the person entrapped within the cage, because it really is. All of it is a mental creation. All of it is a mental projection that the soul starts watching and believes to be the real thing that's going on. And that's really what Rock the Beige represents. He represents this never-ending train of thoughts that the person can live their whole life encapsulated in. And that's why Kali has to come in, Chamunda has to come in to destroy this Ashura, because that is the whole purpose of Kali Sadhana. That is the way in which Kali allows us to gain liberation. That is the way in which Chamunda eats that never-ending stream of demonic thoughts, of negative thinking, of pervasive thinking, of false thinking, of false identification. And that's then, that it just shows you kind of like why one would want to seek out liberation as well in this allegory. And the best way to do that is with Kali Sadhana, with Chamunda Sadhana, but is by and by focusing on that even though it's a difficult thing. I've talked about Kali Sadhana. So sadhana is practice, sadhana is Kali practice. I've talked about how it could be difficult and how you'll likely face a lot of adversities, and that's why. It's because we have to sometimes go through extreme situations so that we can break free of our over-identification with false aspects of our being. So that's most of the note there. And I just mentioned Shumba and Nishumba. I don't exactly say what they are allegories for, what this is all a representation of yet. Excuse me. I believe I say that here in the next note. So, after the battle with Rock the Beige, the Devi battle Shumba and Nishumba in tandem. They fight as though they are one unit. When one is knocked down, the other rises to take his place. The reason for this is that they symbolize ego and attachment. These two qualities work with one another as though in a symbiotic relationship. Ego is the sense of self, and attachment gives all the adornments to ego that give it a sense of separate individuality. Shumba as the ego represents all that is found in I, while Nishumba as attachment represents all that is me and mine. If we are to find true liberation, these things must be overcome, otherwise we will remain in the world of relativity and never transcend to absoluteness. So that's the whole reason, there's an obvious reason why we want to disidentify with our train of thoughts, because our train of thoughts brings us a lot of times, eventually at least, it brings us great suffering. It turns on us, and it bites us, it hurts us, it harms us, and we want to stop that from occurring. And as we go away from that, as we move past that towards a true sense of self, we're eventually moving towards absoluteness, where we're moving past the relative world of our own personal experiences into this more absolute experience, this more transcendent experience. And that is, it's almost from the other side before one has stopped identifying with those train of thoughts, or at least made a valid effort, even before one is really interested in doing this. There is a lot of fear that a person can hold for trying to find something that is transcendent, moving towards the absolute state, because we are in love with our own personal story. We are attached and with our own dream that we're living. You know, it's very much our own thing, and we don't want to let go of it early on. But when one has made it this far down the path, when they have moved past their rajasic state and they're now facing the perversions, the as the word I've been using, but because they're the impure forms of sattva, which is a very good thing. When a person is now facing those, which are as represented by Shumba and Nishumba, ego and attachment, they are ready to look towards that transcendent state as something that they would want to achieve. Where before it was something that was fearful, now it's something that is good. And they can see that and want to move towards it. But ego and attachment are such subtle and difficult. They're such a subtle and difficult enemy, and they take a lot of work, a lot of effort. As even the Devi shows, it's always nothing to her. She ends up destroying them in the end because it's her power. But the show that she puts on is, it's pretty elaborate. As I say here in the first part of the note, that they fight in tandem. They go back and forth. When one falls, the other gets up and takes his place, and back and forth until she destroys one and then the other. And they care very much for each other as well. When the first one dies, I believe Nishumba dies first, Shumba is so mad, that his brother, who was as dear to him as his own life, it says, was taken down. And that's because ego and attachment they need one another, Ego is this false identification with the things that we're attached to. If the ego didn't have the various, things that it's attached to, then it wouldn't have this sense of separate individuality. It wouldn't be that much of an ego. And that is why ego becomes such a negative thing in our life, because eventually we have something like anxiety, and we see that anxiety as a part of ourselves, and it becomes something that the ego attaches itself and identifies itself with. Anxiety or depression, all our various psychoses, we become entrenched within our own issues if we're unable to let go of identification with them, if we're unable to let go of attachment to them. Because, this is something that can be readily seen. A person can make a lot of great progress, but because of negative issues or traits that they've had in the past, they often will re-identify with those things, because ego is still, even if the person is really willing and ready to make the change to something that is transcendent and beyond their relative existence, a lot of times ego will have these little feelers still out there, and there's still need to call out to the Devi. There's still need to seek her assistance and her grace. Otherwise, we forget ourselves. We forget the humility that we learn to get to this place, which is a very important thing. Because as we could see, it says Shumba as the ego represents all that is found in I. So the word I, and Nishumba is me and mine. I, me, and mine. These are the three things that, keep us from fulfilling our potential, from being a truly happy and fulfilled being, who still, you'll still go through relative problems, you'll still experience life negatives and, the constraints of Maya, but it won't be suffering for you any longer. You'll no longer be attached to those negative consequences, and eventually you won't even be attached to the positive ones. Then you'll truly be free of all the things in the world. You'll be living a relative existence with all the good and bad happening to your personal self, but your very being will be so unbounded by the constraints that once held it in a cage. Your mind and your thoughts, won't bother you. You'll watch as it just becomes a tool for you to use, that not something that rules you. Your emotions become a beautiful sounding board to connect you with others instead of something that drives your life. And, all aspects of your life change when you can get past your attachments, when you can seek the grace of the Devi, when you can become humble enough to seek your own sense of spirit, to seek out your own soul. When you can start to do that and really have a sense of soul that's not attached to these ego identifications, these ego attachments, then you will become what you are meant to be. So the next note says, after Nishumba is defeated, one of the most iconic lines during the battle sequences is said by the Devi when she asks, "Who else is there besides me?" At that point, all the embodied Shaktis, or powers born of the gods, return to her own body. This scene is important philosophically as it reveals the underlying idea that the goddess exists throughout all of creation while transcending it. She easily and playfully defeats all her enemies, for they are truly just a part of her, as we all are. And that's what you're meant to be. That's what we're meant to be, is to return to that memory of us being part of the absolute consciousness, just awake and moving in an embodied form. That we are all manifestations of the Devi, that we are all manifestations of the goddess, of the absolute Brahman, beyond gender identity, beyond, God, goddess, male, female duality. That we all are the embodied forms of this divine consciousness in its play of good and bad. That line is so poignant. Who else is there besides me? Because the Ashuras, saying how haughty she is for fighting, but she has the help of all these other goddesses. But they all return to her because they're just power. They're just potency, as I said. Like Shivaduti, she's the potency of power itself, and they're all just the various potencies of their types of power, which it all exists throughout it. The ability to have power exists throughout all creation, and she is that in potentiality and actuality when she manifests in beings, and potentiality within them and within all of creation itself. And that is who we are. We have to remember that. That's where our soul leads back to. Because when we can start seeking out our own soul, and when we become our soul starts seeking out its Lord, or our soul starts seeking out the, God, which Yogananda said is the soul of our soul. I think this, excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit right now. But I think this is the last note. So, the Chandi beautifully illustrates how the Devi, who is transcendent and beyond form, embodies herself in the form of the entire cosmos so that she may engage in her eternal Leela, which is play, dance, and sometimes even sport. She is both the soul and nature, Purusha and Prakriti, and she is transcendent. The Chandi illustrates that she is the true power, Shakti, in all the gods, as she is in us and thus transcends all duality, here represented by that of gender. The only reason she is given feminine pronouns is that when propitiated like a mother, she quickly comes to the aid of us, her children. This aspect of propitiation is important and is emphasized by the merchant and the king's action at the end of the text. So that's a lot of what I just said too, maybe put a little more succinctly. Kind of that idea that, she exists within the creation. She even shows that she takes embodied form within the creation if she so pleases. But because she can take direct embodied form, if she's to do that, then this, she's like the DM if we're playing a game of D&D, manifesting as some sort of godlike being, obviously, into the game that we're playing. And, because that's just the role that she plays. And that's when she manifests, of course, as various avatars. All the forms of Vishnu then would just be forms of the Devi, and any embodied form of the god, they have the Devi to thank for that, and they will either propitiate or praise, dependent upon the mood, the season, rather, the reason for whether thanks or the need to ask for help. And the merchant and the king at the end show that this goes beyond even just the gods. The gods aren't the only ones who have the power to ask for her help and aid, and to have her come and to, give them what they ask for. But also we do as well. That human beings do as well. That it is, she is our truest self too. Not only is, the God, are the gods, her manifestations, her embodiments, but we are as well. That's the whole point of this, is to remember that is where we can find her grace, is by seeking inward, by getting rid of our attachment to all of these various things that we identify with, that we use to define ourselves, that we become dependent upon, that we become slaves to. This very sense of self, this very sense of this is who I am, and this is what I do, and this is how I think, and this is the kinds of things I feel about, and these are my political views, and these are ways that we identify ourselves. When we attach ourselves to it and really believe that this is us, then we detach ourselves from her. When we attach ourselves to those things, we detach ourselves from her, and we are not able to experience all the glory and grace and power that she can bring into our life, how she can revivify our life so that we can, be something better, which is her, so that we can be her, which is our true self, which is to say that we can be our soul, and we can start to seek the soul of our soul and shine that light constantly, which doesn't only lead for a life, like I said, of just good events. We have the good and we have the bad, but now we can take things freely. We can experience life freely, watching all of this, and playing even, we watch it, but we are also given, because we're tapping into powers, since this is, the path of Shakti, we're able to start using it to enjoy this play a little bit more, in a little bit more of an immersive and enjoyable way, a way that it was more meant to be played. Okay, I think that covers it. I am going to do another video or two. We'll see how long it takes to cover the quotes as well. I enjoy talking about this, so, I'm fine with 2 videos. I hope you all are as well, but we'll see. It might only be 1. But there's a lot of good lines in there. I could, do every single line I could give commentary on, but I'll have to maybe even go through and see if I chose, too many or not enough, and I'll be doing a video here soon, going over that. So thank you all so much, and I will talk to you soon.